turn it over to Alvin and the team from the Regina Public Library project to talk a little bit more about what they did.
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. Maybe I'll give a couple of lines of self-introduction first. So my name is Alvin Yau. I am the manager of planning and research at Regina Public Library. I'm responsible for data analytics, policies and procedure, among a couple of other things. I was listening to listening about the previous project with great interest because it made me realize that our project, what we worked with Data for Good on, we're in a very different spot. So it provided, I'm so delighted to see things from a different perspective in the previous project. I don't have a PowerPoint, but maybe I will spend a few minutes talking about the impact of our partnership with Data for Good before turning it over to Sean to highlight the real star of the show, which was the dashboard, the tool that they worked with us to create, or we worked with them to create. So to understand first the impact of working with Data for Good, I need to say a couple of things first about why we wanted to work with them. So an important piece of work for us this year is that we're preparing for the Service Points Master Plan that we are working on. So RPL is made up of a downtown central library and 8 branch locations throughout the city. And while many of the 8 branches have undergone relocations and expansions throughout the years, there have been no new branches of RPL. We haven't opened a new branch for about 40 years. And as our city grows, and it is growing really rapidly, as you well know, we must expand our services, we must expand our physical presence, and reimagine our offerings to provide our growing city with access to programs and services. So we wanted to take a look at where we are currently offering our services, where we could offer our services in the future, and not just in terms of physical branches, but also perhaps self-service hold blockers and kiosks, for example, partnerships with external stakeholders, physical spaces for programs and services, things of that nature. We don't have any conclusions yet, but this work is critical to help us figure that part of the puzzle out. So we partnered with Data for Good on that to answer these questions, whether there are areas of the city or groups of people who are currently underserved by our current physical layout, whether the current locations or neighborhoods are optimal physical locations for our branches, and what potential locations there are for future service points. The work we did with Data for Good was really collaborative in nature, which I very much appreciated, and our teams communicated regularly to ensure that both teams' needs were being met. In the end, we were able to really leverage the expertise that the Data for Good team had and received some very high quality analysis that answered all of our questions. There were lots of impacts, but I'd like to highlight a couple of short-term impacts and one impact that's a little longer term, more cultural in nature. So the Data for Good team really helped us overcome an expertise issue. So I'm responsible for data analytics, as I mentioned. I have one assessment librarian reporting to me who does a lot of the legwork in terms of data analysis. Neither of us really had an expertise in GIS software, in creating geospatial analysis. So Data for Good really helped us plug that hole on our team. They informed us of data sources that we knew very little about, if at all, and introduced us to a new way to think about geospatial data analysis. I would say, though, that the most important impact of working with Data for Good is much longer term and cultural. And what I mean by that is that since we worked with them, we have acquired GIS software for our own team, and we're starting to learn how to use it to create maps that really tell a compelling story. We've already started work on a project that is unaffiliated with our work with Data for Good, which is already generating a lot of conversations as to where we draw our current clientele from. So I'm quite delighted that the impact of our partnership is long lasting. And with that, I will turn it over to Sean to show you what we did.
Thank you. Martin, do you want to jump in here before I do my before I show some of the slides, or are you okay with me just going ahead?
I think in the essence of time, I think you can take it away. I'll just say Sean and Christy, we are both of them on the call, did the actual heavy lifting on the analysis. So kudos to them. And yeah, Sean, please take it away.
Sounds good. I'm just going to share my screen here real quick. A lot of the great work was done by Martin and Christy, so we worked on this together. We worked in collaboration with the Regina Public Libraries, where a lot of the data did come from them directly. And so I guess one of the things that we looked at, we kind of sliced and diced this data in a bunch of different ways. One of the ones that we were kind of most interested in is doing, I guess, what we would call a suitability analysis, where you take a whole bunch of GIS data or a whole bunch of spatial data, and you relate it together. Essentially, you kind of like, you take as much as you can, you essentially overlay it together to create a kind of multivariable analysis. And so we took, this is kind of like this, there's a couple of slides here that show kind of the process of it. And then we'll show kind of one final slide that kind of shows kind of what the resultant product turns out to be. And so one of the things that we were interested in doing, so I guess it's just like going back really quickly. So I work at SaskTel, and we do this type of thing, the suitability analysis for our own company in terms of, how best to deliver our services. And we did a very similar project about 2 years ago for the Regina Food Bank, which is essentially showing where within the city of Regina, where there are gaps in services of their, of kind of where they're located, or people that had difficulty kind of accessing their services. And so we took very similar approaches, where essentially we took kind of every single variable that we could think of that helped us kind of quantify or see kind of how kind of distributed the city of Regina was. And so I'll just show you a couple of like really interesting slides that came out of it. And so the process that we did was we took the locations of the food bank. So this is, I think it was Regent Place was the library. This is kind of just showing like a dot on the map. And if you go to the next slide, essentially what we did is we took every single address in the city of Regina, then we calculated the travel time from that location to the branch office. And so we did this for mass transit, so buses. We did this for walking, and we did this for essentially driving. Were kind of like the three key kind of things. And so if you go to the next slide, if you continue doing this and you put essentially every single point on the map that shows you that shows you kind of the distance from that person's location to the branch, you can go to the next slide. It creates these what we call like raster images, essentially these fully kind of interpreted maps that show kind of the distribution of travel times. And so if you go to the next slide, if you add in, so that was kind of doing a walking time. So this is doing it in driving time, with the actual dots showing kind of the color. The further away someone is from the library, the further the points are red, and then the closer they are, the points are yellow. And so it shows you just kind of distribution of travel times within the city. So if you go to the next slide, so if you aggregate all of those for every single library, you get something that looks like this, which shows kind of a distribution map of where things are, where data is, or where customers have good access via transportation, and where the access is sometimes further away or sometimes limited. And so if you go to the next slide, and so we did kind of the same thing around kind of we took kind of every single variable that we can think of. So we looked at like why people were going to libraries. We were thinking of a lot of times we'd actually Alvin was really good, where they actually ran surveys during our work where they actually asked people that were visiting libraries, what is it actually, why are you actually coming to this library? Like, what is it? Why are you using this library? And so through those results, we gathered a whole bunch of new variables. And one of them was people go to libraries because of amenities that are close to it. And so we plotted locations of shopping locations or kind of retail locations that were somewhat popular for people that were visiting libraries. And so we So we plotted those on the map. And so if you go to the next slide, so we did look at population density, which is just kind of another kind of density-based measurement. So if you go to the next one. So this is kind of like, I have 2 more slides here, and then I can kind of open it up for questions and hand it over to Ryan. But what we did was we took all of that data, and essentially what you do is you create a scale that's similar across every single dimension. So all the variables have the same scale, and you essentially just stack them on top of them. So this is kind of the best I could do in terms of visualizing what that process looks like, where you essentially just push all the data together, and then you come up with a multivariable analysis of like what that, or where if you combine every single piece of data, where is it most, or I guess best served and least well served within the city. And so if you go to the next slide, so this is essentially kind of like the final output. So all of that work, essentially pulling driving distances, pulling walking distance, pulling mass transit distances, pulling shopping locations, pulling the hierarchy of roads within the city, looking at population density, looking at specific kind of metrics that the public library had provided us as well. You get this one kind of indication, or you get this one map that shows, this map showed in green are areas that would be best suited for library kind of locations, whether it's kiosk or branch expansion. And then you have areas that are really well covered. So those ones that be in the red, where locations of library would make the most sense. And so essentially this one image takes in literally hundreds of thousands of data points, all kind of mashed together into one visualization. And so this is kind of like the end, or I guess this is probably the main product that we delivered to the Regina Public Libraries, but there was a bunch of other analytics as well. And so, but this is probably, it kind of tells the entire data story through one image. And so with that, that's kind of all I have to say today. So